Hey everyone! The animated series Invincible keeps proving just how complex, intense, and unpredictable the journey of a superhero really is. With every new episode, the stakes get higher, and Mark Grayson's path becomes more and more dangerous. And in the upcoming episode 7, our young hero is about to face one of his worst nightmares: alternate, ruthless versions of himself. If you're eagerly waiting to find out what to expect from the next chapter of this unconventional superhero action series, you've come to the right place. We'll be diving into the evil versions of Invincible and discussing their fate in the show, who will survive and who won't. Now, get ready for spoilers. But let's take it one step at a time. The next chapter of Mark's life will be a nightmare that goes down in history. The loss of a battle comrade. The life of the woman he loves hanging by a thread. Millions dead, cities reduced to rubble, countless voices cursing his name, and at the heart of it all, the Invincible War. The mad multiversal traveler, scientist Levy, has not forgotten his vendetta. In their last encounter, Levy dragged Mark across the most remote corners of the multiverse, only to suffer a brutal defeat. It seemed like Mark had killed him, bringing Levy's story to its rightful conclusion. But a man who sold his soul to science doesn't give up so easily. He teleported himself to the finest surgeons in the universe. They stitched him back together, enhanced him, and sent him back into the game, this time with a deal in place. If he fails again, he will return to serve the very ones who saved him. And now, the mad scientist was back to his old ways, but this time with a new plan. Levy had conceived something truly monstrous. He gathered 16 alternate versions of Invincible, brutal, merciless, utterly corrupt to their core. An army of killers, powerful enough to wipe entire worlds from existence. The plan was simple: unleash war upon the original Earth. Scatter these monsters across the planet, turning it into a colossal slaughterhouse. Burning cities, capitals reduced to rubble, millions dead. All to ensure that every living soul under the sun would curse the name Invincible. In return, Levy promised each conqueror the one thing they desired most: freedom from the confines of their tiny universes. Infinite worlds, theirs for the taking. And making it happen was the easiest part. Levy would grant them access to other dimensions, and they would handle the bloodshed on their own. While Mark was casually chatting with Eve, thinking he'd finally caught a moment to breathe, innocent lives were being wiped out at the speed of light all across the planet. Now, it's time to get up close with the villains. If you have any extra info on the Invincibles, don't hesitate to share in the comments. On the Invincible, the one who killed his own father and took on his colors as a tribute to his memory. 3 versions in white and gray suits, clear signs of their connection to the Viltrumite Empire. But each has their own story. One wears a prison robe, his skin burned. He spent a year in captivity. The second wiped Spawn from existence in his universe. And the third, along with his commanding officer's uniform, he sports an impressive mustache. Mark Grayson, the one who never fought his father. Instead, he stood by his side. Together, they conquered their Earth and turned it into a Viltrumite colony. A psychopath with a mohawk, the ruler of the Viltrumite Empire in his dimension, and his headquarters is located high above the Pentagon. And the last one worth mentioning, Sinister Mark. The world he was born into was corrupt from the very start. He became its reflection, even more evil, even more destructive. He is considered the most terrifying of the 16. Why? I'll explain that a little later. What we do know is that he killed his mother in their own home. And in the animated series, we saw how Sinister terrorized Levy in his own dimension, killing his son right before his eyes. As for the others, not much is known. And so, Levy's butchers went on the hunt. They wiped prisons and architectural landmarks off the face of the Earth, destroyed the Pentagon, showing the superhero community who the real power was. Military bases, hero headquarters, and cities with millions of people all fell into chaos. The news reported sightings of the same criminals, superhumans, indistinguishable from Invincible, around the globe. Who are they? Why are they attacking? There were no answers. Adam, Eve, Oliver, and Invincible joined the fight, but they were unprepared. No one was strikes were delivered across the planet, and at one point, the heroes were scattered, with Earth on the brink of destruction. Cecil mobilized everyone he could. The superhero army was gathering in a hurry. On this day, even iconic characters like Spawn and Witchblade joined the battle. Teleporters were transporting fighters to the heart of the action. Radios were used to communicate the progress of events, and the wounded, who were immediately assisted in evacuating the battlefield. The headquarters of the Global Defense Agency became the last bastion of resistance. In the midst of the chaos, Cecil Stedman coordinated the defenders of the planet, pushing them to their limits. But even the best heroes weren't ready for the scale of this war. The battles never stopped, not for a second. During one of them, Eve sustained severe injuries, and without hesitation, Mark rushed her to the hospital. Monster Girl was also hurt. In order to save his comrades, Rexplode sacrificed his own life. He charged his skeleton and detonated it, taking out the enraged version of Invincible. The whole world needed Mark Grayson, but he wasn't about to leave Eve's side for even a moment. Cecil was putting pressure on him, reminding him that only he could turn the tide of the battle. However, Invincible was convinced that Cecil had enough superheroes at his disposal to manage without him. The slaughter continued for 48 hours. The earth was burning, cities lay in ruins, and the air was thick with smoke and blood. The first phase of the plan was complete. Now, it was time for the next step. Invincible's reputation was shattered. People would never forget this nightmare. And most importantly, they would never forgive. The scientist was pleased, and he gathered the Invincibles to discuss the next details. Levy wanted to do to Mark what had been done to him, to desecrate his flesh, to disfigure him beyond recognition. He ordered his Invincibles to bring Mark in alive. But then, an unexpected twist awaited him. Only 8 of the 16 fighters remained, and the remaining ones weren't willing to take any more risks. They had already fulfilled part of their deal. Disappointed, the scientist teleported them to the wasteland dimension. At that time, Angstrom had no idea that he was condemning them to certain death. I'll tell you exactly what happened to the Invincibles and who survived a little later. I don't want to break the main thread of the story just yet. So, Levy wanted to disfigure Mark. But, contrary to all his calculations, Mark found him first. He couldn't understand how the scientist had survived after that horrific battle. The smug scientist explained that he was simply a genius and had prepared for the possibility of failure by enhancing his strength and endurance. But even that wasn't enough. In case of failure, he had a backup plan. He could turn to surgeons in a parallel dimension, who patched him up and brought him back to life. Rage burned inside Mark. Everything that had happened to him and to the world was the result of this madman's actions. Levy didn't just destroy his reputation and image. He had destroyed thousands of lives, leaving nothing behind but death and ruin. In reality, the number of victims was far higher than Mark knew at that moment. Oliver, watching the events unfold, was certain of one thing. The scientist had to be dealt with once and for all. And if Mark had confirmed Angstrom's death, all this nightmare could have been avoided. Invincible had already made up his mind. The scientist's story had to end right here, right now. And before Levy could escape through the portal, Grayson tore his arm off. Levy once again sought help from the technicians, the doctors who had managed to get him back on his feet. The scientist begged them to heal him so he could free the remaining 8 Invincibles and, together with them, attack the original. But this time he was refused. Now, he had to honor his part of the deal. Namely, in case of failure, he would have to work for them. Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York were almost wiped off the face of the earth. Comparable damage was sustained by Moscow, Paris, London, Sydney, and Tokyo. The death toll had already reached millions and continued to rise. According to analysts' forecasts, the number of casualties could be 3 times higher. Rescue teams worked around the clock, finding many survivors beneath the rubble. Hundreds of thousands of people worldwide had lost their homes. The reasons for the attack were unknown, and it was unlikely they would ever be clear. However, witnesses spoke of attacks by versions of Invincible. That Asterisk guy, whose father turned out to be a villain and even tried to conquer the world. Some even believed that Omni-Man, along with Invincible, were in cahoots and had merely postponed their plans for planetary conquest. While various theories about Mark Grayson and his involvement in the events were being proposed, he was in a hospital next to Adam Eve. The internal conflict gnawed at him. On one hand, the desire to stay by Samantha's side. On the other, the duty that wouldn't allow him to lock himself in a hospital room. He had to help as many of the injured as possible. This is likely what awaits us in the next episode. But the most important thing is that the Invincible War will lay the foundation for one of the most legendary battles. We're talking about the epic showdown between Invincible and one of the oldest and most powerful Viltrumites, Conquest. If you'd like me to make a detailed video about Conquest's origin story, his powers, abilities, and many other nuances, drop a comment and give this video a like. Now let's talk about what happened to the Invincibles in the Wasteland dimension. Who knew that getting involved in Levy's clever scheme would lead to even more horrifying events? Bored out of their minds, they talked endlessly about different topics, including trying to figure out why they had become so evil. Some of them had been trained by their fathers from a young age to conquer the planet. But for most of them, the turning point came when they realized just how different they were from the rest of humanity and how stupid it was to waste their time protecting them without getting anything in return. In reality, there are very few worlds where Mark was a good person with the right motivations. In most dimensions, he was ultra-cruel and merciless. Time passed, first days, then weeks. The 8 of them still couldn't escape the wasteland. Despair set in, and hunger took over. Eventually, they resorted to cannibalism. Sinister Mark turned them against each other. Despite the lack of food, their powers didn't weaken. Instead, they transformed into even more savage versions of themselves. They killed and devoured each other. And to cope with their thirst, they had to drink their own sweat and other stuff. Only Sinister and Mohawk managed to survive. They were stuck there for several years, but eventually, the guy with the Mohawk crushed Sinister. Although Mohawk managed to return to his home dimension, of course, with Armstrong Levy's involvement, death still found him. This time, it came in the form of Robot. But that, as they say, is a completely different story. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoy it. Wait for you in the next video.